I want to talk about the shoulder blade and the rotator cuff muscles. So we have 4 rotator cuff muscles: teres minor, infraspinatus, supraspinatus, subscapularis. That's from smallest to largest right there. 3 of them are on the posterior side of the body, so on the back of the body. And what's really interesting that I was studying here in this unit right now is that apparently the 3 rotator cuff muscles that are on the back, on the posterior side of the body, so that is the infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis, they actually have a directional pull on the humeral head to push it into the glenoid cavity. What does this mean? So basically, every joint in the body, from head to toe, either has a propensity for stability or mobility, right? So it's either going to be a more stable joint or a more mobile joint with more range of motion. Shoulder joint is a joint that has a lot more range of motion, a lot more mobility than it does stability. So it's at a higher risk for injuries, for certain musculoskeletal issues as a result of its lack of stability. And this is because, well, largely one of many reasons, because only a third of the humeral head sits into the glenoid cavity. I believe I have that right. If I got it wrong, I'll put it on the screen. And so, because only a third of it sits in there, we have more range of motion. We got more room to move the shoulder. So we can move our shoulder in this circumduction nature. We can rotate externally, rotate, abduct, adduct. We can do all this great stuff that enables us to throw and get into all these great positions in sport, run, jump, which is great. But the point of me saying it has a directional pull, because one of the questions here was like, how does the rotator cuff muscles provide stability to the glenohumeral joint? The glenohumeral joint is right here, where the glenoid connects with the humerus in the shoulder region. Okay, so how does they provide stability to the glenohumeral joint? And one really interesting thing that I didn't know previously to covering this functional human anatomy, I'll put it on the screen, but I have it all here in my notes, is this diagram showing that the 3 rotator cuff muscles on the posterior side pulls that humeral head against the glenoid cavity, and while the deltoid actually wants to pull the humeral head up towards the glenoid cavity and superiorly translate that humerus. The deltoid becomes too active in the presence of an underactive or tight rotator cuff. It can pull the humeral head too far vertically, impinging on the bursa sac. That's why having good control and strength in the rotator cuff is important to counteract too much superior translation. Man, I need to take a drink after that. What are the practical implications to this? So what does this all mean? So for an athlete, for any individual, most people who want more strength and stability and mobility in their shoulders, actually scratch all that. Most people don't have good range of motion, really good range of motion in their shoulders. Most people have some musculoskeletal issues. Most people can't get in. A lot of people, and this is something I've learned through just coaching general population clients, a lot of people can't even raise their hands above their head into shoulder flexion without pain or restriction of movement, right? Kelly Starrett talks about this all the time. And so there could be a number of reasons. You could have bursitis, where the bursa impinges and you get inflammation, which I've dealt with a client like that before. But we want to mitigate that from even happening, right? So, but this can be applied to regardless if you have bursitis or where you have some sort of shoulder impingement. You want to be a lot more cautious, but this can apply to that situation as well if you're looking for more mobility in the shoulder. So we don't just want to put the scapula through one range of motion. Most people, we live in a very anterior world, like very front, anterior dominant positions all the time. I'm sitting down right now. And so my shoulder is going to have a propensity to internally rotate. So my anterior side of my body is going to become quite tight, and the posterior side often becomes quite weak and unstable. And so this is especially relevant for our shoulder blade, our scapula. And so if you don't want to be 50 years old and 40 years old with still half your life left and you can't lift your damn arm above your head. I had a client who's 40 years old and couldn't do that. We're still working on it every session. If you want to avoid being in that position when you're in a couple of years' time, or if you're in that position now and want to mitigate it, then you need to put the scapula through all of its directions. We take it back to the directional pull, so those 3 posterior rotator cuff muscles are trying to suck the humeral head into the glenoid cavity. That's a healthy shoulder. A healthy shoulder is going to do that. An unhealthy shoulder, an unstable shoulder, is going to be a lot less efficient at performing that function, right? So, if we want to improve the function, health of our shoulder, and we don't want to be, so if we take it back to being too anterior dominant, that's where the deltoid comes. So the deltoid often becomes overactive if we overwork it, or if the rotator cuffs aren't doing their job correctly. If they're not able to pull against the humeral head because of their own instabilities and weaknesses and tightness in the muscle, then the deltoid is going to try and compensate. And so it's going to pull the humeral head too far vertically, and this is when impingements happen. So to counteract that, we need to strengthen rotator cuff muscles. So the scapula moves through protraction, retraction, upward rotation, downward rotation, elevation, depression, and it's responsible for abduction, adduction, shoulder flexion, extension, all these movements that we need in day-to-day life and in sport especially. So all that is to say, you need to put your shoulder blade through all these different movements. So maybe I'll like cut to like an example video of doing this. Essentially that means don't just do horizontal pulling, and don't just program rows for your athlete or for yourself. You need to put so oftentimes one of my favorite upper body unilateral movements is a landmine press. That's what I forgot the name of. Landmine press. You have a barbell in the corner of a room or attached to an implement, and you're pressing up in a diagonal on a 45-degree angle, and your shoulder blade is able to upwardly rotate, and when you come down it's able to reset back in its original position. But it's just the act of taking your shoulder blade through full upward rotation and back resetting to its neutral position, and then combining that with hanging. Hanging is great. First, you get to decompress the spine, and 2, you get to also in that position, especially if you have rings, you can find a position that's most comfortable for you because you can rotate the rings any way you want. I wish I was in a gym right now. This would be heaps better in a gym. I don't have my notes in the gym though. You can rotate the rings in any position you want and you can go through internal, external rotation, just prying open that joint, right? And at the same time, you can do little reverse shrugs. So you can be pulling your shoulder blades together against your body weight and relaxing, going through elevation and depression. So that right there is just elevation, depression. You don't have to hang your whole body and do that. You can lift your legs up on a bench as well. And we got protraction, retraction. We got the horizontal pulling, and then that's a vertical pull right there. And then you can go further and do pull-ups if your shoulder blades are healthy, that is, because most people don't do pull-ups correctly. Their shoulder blades just stay freezed in that one position. Little information about the shoulder, the rotator cuff muscles, and how important they are in movement and achieving a healthy shoulder and fully functioning shoulder and body.